Hey everybody, what's going on? Hexlex here. I got another Master Duel video for you all today. So, today I wanted to do a deck discussion, which, it's a big surprise. I talk about decks all the time on this channel, right? Well, today's deck discussion is going to be a little bit different because normally I like to talk about decks in a fairly objective manner, just how the deck is played, its place in the format, so on and so forth. Today we're going to be talking about Ishizu Tearlaments, but rather than talk about how the deck is played, because I'm sure that a lot of people who still play Master Duel regularly have very much known by now, at least generally, how Tearlaments is played, what their game plan is, so on and so forth. I wanted to instead talk more about Tearlaments' place in the meta and kind of my thoughts on that. I've kind of sprinkled some opinions about Tearlaments here and there throughout, recent videos, but I figured I'd just kind of like condense all that into one video here. And, as always, as ever, you are more than welcome to agree or disagree with me. That's the great thing about opinions, that we all get to have different ones. So if your opinions differ from mine or not, regardless, I am definitely not opposed to hearing from you in the comment section below. So definitely do not be afraid to share your own voice there, because, I figure if I'm going to tell you my thoughts on this deck, it's only fair that you all have a chance to do the same. So how do I feel about Tearlaments now that we are well into the Tier 0 meta? I want to actually first start by talking a little bit about some misconceptions that I think people have about the deck. I don't see these like super duper often in like the comments on my channel or anything, but if I'm browsing like the Master Duel subreddit or some Discord servers, it's not uncommon to see comments to the effect of, one of the big criticisms that I see for Tearlaments that I think is hugely misplaced is a lot of people will say that Tearlaments are not a skillful deck, that it is all in fact about getting lucky off of mills. And that I think is just absolutely unfathomably untrue. And I think a criticism like that is more indicative of the experience that somebody has with Tearlaments or lack thereof than the actual state of Tearlaments in the game. Anyone who's played this deck for a significant amount of time at a competitive level will tell you that this is not a luck-based deck, like pretty much at all. Not any more so than any other Yu-Gi-Oh deck is, right? I think a lot of people have this like misconception that Ishizu Tearlament is all about just like firing off a miller and then hoping you get a bunch of good mills, but as I've discussed a lot, especially in my videos where I play this deck, that's absolutely not how you want to play this deck. And in fact, I think activating a Miller effect generally, not always, but generally, going first and not knowing what you're playing against is a misplay. I think that a good or skilled Tearlament player will be able to guide their mills towards their plays in a way that they set themselves up to succeed, basically. The way to do that is to only mill yourself or to control what you mill, mostly through Rhinoheart. I mean, that's why I like playing Rhoda and Foolish Burial Goods, is to open Rhinoheart more often. If you have 3 Rhinoheart, Rhoda, Foolish Goods, Terraforming, and Pearl Rhino, you have already a 67%, about a 2 in 3 chance of opening Rhinoheart in your opening hand. So already from there, we're seeing that this deck has a lot of control over how it mills and how it sets up, so on and so forth. Now, I will say there is the occasional hand where you open something like, I don't know, Keldo and Agido, and then it's like, yeah, if that's all you have, then you don't really have much of other choice to make plays other than to, get it twisted. Go ahead and discard the Agido and just mill both players. But generally speaking, this deck is not luck-based. Not at all. Or again, not any more so than any other Yu-Gi-Oh deck. In that, there are hands where occasionally you do have to hope for a high roll, but for the most part, you are very much in control of your plays. I think that the luck sackiness of the deck does tend to come down to build a lot of the times, right? Because that's the thing. There's a difference between, like, when you look at a Tearlaments player's mills and try to assess how good or bad the mills were, there's definitely a difference between like bad mills due to variance and bad mills due to deck building decisions. For this build, for example, this is like my tournament build for Ishizu Tearlaments. I typically like to take the latter too, because the things that I value in a tournament build, I value in deck builds in general, and that's overall valuing consistency over high rolling. You know, I'm not playing any cards like Heartbeat to hope to draw that in a matchup where I'm up against the Floodgate. I'm not playing cards like Cyber Sign to hope to mill that in an instance where I can bring it back with Sprite Elf and then make like an HRA Extria or something. We're not playing King of the Swamp, Polymerization, and Guardian Chimera to hope to high roll a situation where we open the King of the Swamp, pitch it for Poly, and Guardian Chimera is also good to make in that situation. Instead, again, we're just playing stuff like Rhoda, Foolish Goods, to more consistently get the plays we already care about. 3 Scream to be more consistent in that regard. Triple Tack is more of a general tool and not part of a specific high rolling combo line. So I think a lot of people will see like on Ranked Ladder or in like the events, the WCQ 2023 event, people playing these high rolling cards and kind of think to themselves that Tearlaments is a bit of a luck based deck in that regard. And I think that also tends to come due to like cognitive bias as well. The idea that, you know, we remember the times we got luck sacked and high rolled, but like how often do you actually think about the games where, you know, your opponent opened, I don't know, something like Merly Scream, and then they whiffed all their mills because they hit like Cyberstein, Heartbeat, and then a bunch of other like dead stuff, right? You're just not going to remember those games as often. It's just like, yeah, how the human mind works. We just more often remember negative experiences. So in that regard, I think those are the two main factors as to why people think Tearlaments is high rolly, and I generally disagree with that statement overall. Another criticism that people will make about Tearlaments is that the mirror match isn't skillful because it's all about going Dweller Turbo. That's another statement I disagree with. I do disagree with it slightly less, and I have to emphasize very slightly, because I will acknowledge that there are times where you can just make Dweller very early in the mirror match and effectively lock your opponent out of the game. But at the same time, I don't think that it's the be-all, end-all of the mirror match. I've had plenty of Tier 1 mirror matches, many of which are featured on this channel. I can think of a couple of times in particular where I've pointed out, you know, my opponent and I had a very back-and-forth mirror match, and neither of us summoned Dweller. Sometimes there's not really a good moment for either of you to summon Dweller. I would actually say that it's probably about 50-50, looking back, that, you know, whether or not the mirror match involves Dweller at any point. I think another thing, too, that people kind of have a cognitive bias against Dweller towards is when they play the mirror match and the opponent goes into a Dweller on turn 1. And it's like, oh, of course, you know, they made a Dweller on turn 1 and now I can't do anything. But I will say that I think making Dweller on turn 1 is not always. Of course, it's very hand and situationally dependent if you know what your opponent's playing or not. But if you don't know what your opponent's playing, I think making Dweller on turn 1 is generally a misplay. Like, I think a lot of people assume that they're always going to be up against Tearlaments in any matchup they roll, right? And that is true to an extent. Like, you can say that most of the time you will play against Tearlaments, but even if that is 60 to 65% of the time, that's still 35 to 40% of the time you're playing against decks that aren't Tearlaments, which is a significant portion of decks. And although Dweller is generally pretty good, as far as countering graveyard-based decks, there are a lot of graveyard-based decks that can still, like, because you can still special summon and move stuff out of the graveyard, you just can't activate effects that, you know, activate in the graveyard. So Dweller is very matchup dependent, and it's really only at its best in the mirror match. So I think that a lot of people, again, remember the times they play the mirror match and their opponent made Dweller on turn 1. It's like, oh, of course. Oh, I'm sorry, one of my alarms is going off there. Apologies. Anyway, so yeah, people will tend to remember these instances, right, where somebody made Dweller turn 1, and then that'll just stick with them, when I don't think that's generally the right thing to do a lot of the time. And it's true that it doesn't always come up on turn 1. You know, Dweller often does come up later after, you know, it's been confirmed that you're playing the mirror match, right? But at the same time, I don't think it's necessarily backbreaking. I think a lot of people will see a Floodgate and just kind of like mentally concede. This is something a concept I've been talking about on the channel for like as long as I've had the channel, is mentally conceding, where you don't actually hit the surrender button just yet, but your opponent plays a Floodgate and you start just only really having thoughts to the effect of like, oh my god, of course they made the Floodgate, now I can't do anything. And I'm just gonna have to sit here and watch my opponent win. A lot of people will fall into that mental trap when you really need to be thinking like, okay, now that the floodgate is in play, what kind of plays can I make under these circumstances? What is the best line I could do? How can I get rid of the floodgate? And how can I continue to make plays afterward? You need to keep proactively thinking about how to out the situation at hand. And Dweller is like not a particularly difficult monster to out, to be totally honest. Yeah, I don't know. I just think, like, yes, Dweller is very polarizing. And yes, I do also think that mirror matches would generally improve without Dweller. However, I will also say that just because a Dweller has hit the board does not mean the mirror matches become unwinnable for the player who does not have Dweller. I think that's a very defeatist mentality, and I think it's a very self-fulfilling prophecy as well. Again, this idea of mentally conceding, just kind of giving up on trying to find an out, and then, well, you don't find the out because you're not looking for it. So those are a few of the misconceptions that I wanted to, like, clear up, I guess, about Tearlaments that I see people saying kind of against the deck, and that I generally disagree with. However, I will say a couple of things, I guess. I don't know. I don't like saying that, like, oh, I'm going to say I'm because, you know, a lot of people will boil it down to, like, oh, do you like or hate Tearlaments? And I think that's more of an issue of, like, general thinking as opposed to just how Yu-Gi-Oh players think. This idea that, like, there can't be nuanced opinions, you either have to like or dislike something. It's kind of a pet peeve of mine, because I think that more people should have more nuanced takes. So that's my long way of saying that my take on Tearlaments is nuance. Yes, I do think that they are generally very skillful. I think that the mirror match is particularly very skillful. And I think that people who say the mirror match comes down to Dweller and people who say that Tearlaments is a high royal luck based deck, I just don't agree with that at all. I just think that they're wrong personally. So in that regard, it might seem like I'm very pro-tier, but there are, you know, things about Tearlaments that I don't like as well, namely their power level, and I think a lot of people can generally agree about this. This is actually more of a discussion about Tier 0 metas as a whole than Tearlaments in particular, but it's very polarizing whenever there's a Tier 0 meta, right? Because you have a sect of people who very much value diversity in a meta, and then you have a sect of people who very much value how homogenized the format has become, because that in turn makes the play more skill-based as opposed to being more matchup dependent. And I think that there's merit to both arguments, right? I think that there is merit to the argument that, like, you know, if all the top players are playing Tearlaments, then it is more often than not going to come down to who is the better player. And I think Tearlament mirrors can be very engaging in that regard. So I definitely see the appeal there. However, and I guess I'm mostly just saying this because I'm one of these people, but, like, a lot of people can't just play the same deck for months and months at a time, right? At a competitive level. And I'm, like I just said, I'm very much one of those people. So that is something that, I guess, if you want to label each of these stances as pro or anti-tier, I'm not generally in favor of labeling stances like that, but if you want to, I guess one of my anti-tier, quote-unquote, stances is that I don't like how just pervasive they are in this meta and how much they've warped the meta around themselves. Not just the fact that Tearlament is so ever-present, but also that, you know, a lot of decks and a lot of archetypes in general that are geared towards graveyard hate and, you know, stun effects. You all know what I mean. I'm talking about the dimensional fissures in Flow and Exosisters and Shifters as well. Those are definitely not fun, in my opinion. And I'm not even speaking as a Tearlament player, right? Because a lot of the decks that I like to play are graveyard based. This is a pretty common take, and I think a lot of people will generally agree with this. That it sucks that in order to counter Tearlaments, so many decks have gone anti-graveyard because there are a lot of decks that aren't Tearlament that were already struggling against Tearlament that are now also having to struggle against the anti-graveyard and stun stuff. So yeah, that's a pretty common take, though. It is one I tend to agree with. One I will disagree with is people who are kind of like doomsdayers about it. And what I mean by that is people who say you can't win in this meta unless you're playing Tearlaments or a stun deck. I 100% disagree with that. I think you can absolutely have success. I mean, I talk about this deck all the time because I'm obsessed with it, but, like, I actually managed to somehow top with a Sprite Punk deck list, and as you can see, we're not doing anything decidedly anti-tier. You could argue that, like, going for Psychic End Punisher as, like, your deck's main identity is, like, you know, anti-tier because tier has a hard time dealing with this, but Psychic End Punisher is also just generally a good card. And I definitely had a lot of moments where I doubted. I was like, can a deck like this actually succeed in this meta? But I do think that there is a point where you start being too negative, or rather you start valuing a negative opinion too highly. I think a lot of people will kind of take a negative stance like that, like, oh, you can only succeed with tier or stun in this meta, as like, well, that's not just being negative, that's just being factually, you know, that's just being objective. But I 100% disagree with that. I will quote one of my favorite video game lines from Skies of Arcadia, which is, impossible is a word that people who quit made up to feel better about themselves. That is 100% how I feel when people say that you can't use like a graveyard-based strategy, or you can't brew anything creative and do well within this meta. 100% completely disagree. Not just for myself, but we see quite a few people in like the MCS and other tournaments succeeding with, you know, it could be stuff as innocuous as like Sword Soul, or something as out there as Crystal Beast. They might seem few and far between, well, and I guess they are kind of few and far between, but it does go to show that, like, you can still experience success in this meta with a deck that's not tier or stun. That stance I absolutely disagree with on. So what ultimately needs to happen to Tearlaments? I am not often an advocate of hitting, like, every single card in a deck, mostly because that tends to make decks unplayable, but this is actually a deck where you could limit pretty much every one of the key players here, and yeah, the deck would still be playable. Like, all these cards that are at 2, all the Fusers, Merly, Havnus, Shiren, as well as each of the Ishizu cards, Keldo, Mudora, Kelbeck, and Agito, I think literally all of those cards, all 7 of those cards could go to 1, and Tearlament would still be very playable as a deck. I see people say just ban all the Tearlament cards. I think that's a very, honestly, juvenile reaction. Because the goal of hitting a deck on the ban list is not to make the deck unplayable. I think that's actually quite the opposite. The deck needs to be trimmed back in such a way that it's not as much of a threat as it is to the meta, or as it has been to the meta, but at the same time, if somebody wants to play this deck still, they should still have the ability to do so. So, yeah, I don't agree with just banning every Tearlament card, but at the same time, I don't think limiting, you know, again, Merly, Havnus, Shiren, Keldo, Mudora, Kelbeck, and Agito, I don't think limiting all 7 of those cards is extreme. I think it's just warranted. Kikalos is a little bit more nuanced than a lot of people might think. Now, the fact that it came in at 1 and it's super rare, like, I just know they're going to ban this card, right? It's just kind of obvious, honestly, that they're going to just ban Kikalos. But I think you could actually make an argument that if all the Fusers and all the Ishizu cards go to 1, Kikalos, especially because we don't have instant fusion anymore, I think Kikalos might be able to stay around. Now, again, to be fair, it's just going to get banned. And I also don't think that's extreme, necessarily, but I do think it's possible. It would require some testing, but I think it's possible that Kikalos would be fine if, again, the 7 cards I mentioned all got limited. Rhinoheart can stay at 3. I think it went to 1 in the OCG or TC. One of the metas it went to 1. But I think if all the other cards went to 1, it could stay at 3. That's fine. We already have Planet at 1. If Planet wasn't at 1, it would also need to go to 1 for sure. And there's even less tools here in the TCG and OCG, right? Because here in Master Duel specifically, Foolish Burial Goods is at 1 to make the, you know, setting up searches with Soliac less consistent. And Instant Fusion is banned, so again, that's a way that we can't go for Kikalos there. Alright, so I'm trying to think if there's anything about this deck that any thoughts I have on it that I haven't yet stated. Oh, one thing I will say, and I already made a tweet about this the other day, well, the other day at the time of recording this, it's probably a week ago at the time this video goes out, but these comments are very few and far between, so I almost don't even want to address them, right? Because, you know, it kind of gives attention, I guess, to this vocal minority. And I do know this is a minority opinion, but I see some people like trying to take away the accomplishments of people who do well in this meta in like tournaments and stuff by saying, "Oh, of course you did well. You were playing Tearlaments." And I think that's rude. First of all, like there's no reason other than jealousy to like try to take somebody else down after they've accomplished something. Like there's literally no reason for it other than jealousy. So it just makes yourself look bad to leave a comment like that. And also on top of that, like, it's such an odd statement to make. It's like, oh, you did well. Of course you did. You were using Tearlaments. And it's like, yeah, so is well over half of the playing field of any one of these tournaments. But, like, you're still standing out and, like, getting a top place finish. So, I don't know. That's just more of a personal anecdote. I didn't really get many comments like that. I think I got, like, 1 or 2 when I got top 8 with Tearlaments like that. But I've seen some other people make comments about that, about, like, other players as well, on YouTube, on Reddit, on Discord. So I just wanted to address that. Like, generally speaking, you know, don't tear down somebody else for for doing well at something. It's not a good look, and it's just shitty, and there's no reason for it. So, all right, I think that pretty much sums up all my thoughts about Tearlaments. Again, I guess I have a bit more of a nuanced take, so I can't really give a too long didn't read. But if I had to, my too long didn't read is Tearlaments. I think the mirror match is skillful, and I do think it is fun in that regard. However, at the same time, I personally value deck diversity, so I'm not a fan of Tearlaments' presence in that regard, and I am fully willing to acknowledge and will freely acknowledge that the Tearlament and Shizu cards are far too powerful and need to be hit in mass in order to keep the deck in check. So that's generally where I'm at with Tearlaments right now. But thank you all for watching. If you liked this format of video, I don't really do subjective takes like this often, so definitely feel free to let me know in the comments what you thought of this. And again, whether you agree or disagree with me, you've now, if you've watched up to this point, 1, thank you, and 2, you've listened to me talk about my feelings about this deck for over 20 minutes now, so, you know, it's the least, it's literally the least I could do to offer you the platform to give your thoughts as well, so definitely don't be afraid to do so in the comments below. But that's going to go ahead and do it for this one. Let's just move now to our outro. Alright everybody, thank you so much for watching all the way to the very end of the video like this. That means a whole lot to me, not just personally, but it's also a great way of supporting the channel as well. If you're interested in supporting the channel in other means, you can of course feel free to comment and or subscribe right here on YouTube. I'm always looking to the comments section. You guys leave some pretty awesome feedback as far as like constructive criticism goes when it comes to deck building, gameplay, channel content, all that stuff. So feel free to leave your opinion down there. I will be sure to take a look at that there. And then subscribing is going to be the best way to get notifications of when these videos drop. That does happen every day, by the way, so if you're looking for daily Master Duel content, you've come to the right place. And there are more places where you can get some daily Master Duel content. If you check out the description below, follow the top link over to my Patreon page. There for just $5 a month, which is as much as you pay for a booster pack. You'll find a lot more value than a pack full of filler over there. We've got some previews for content upcoming here on the channel. We've got some exclusive games that are only posted over on Patreon over there. We've got some Q&As, and then you can also have your name featured in this lovely credit sequence where I thank all of the people who are helping contribute over there on Patreon. It's a huge support to the channel, and it really means a lot as well. So thank you everyone who is donating that is featured here on screen. And again, you know, it's not just a pure donation. You do get some more daily Master Duel content over there just for being a part of the Patreon. But I think that's about all the time that I have for today's video. Once again, I just want to thank you so very much for sticking all the way to the end of the video. Again, it just means a lot, as I do put a decent amount of work into getting these videos out every single day. But that's about all the time that I've got for now, so without further ado, this is Xlex. I'm signing out, and I hope you have a fantastic day.